Hi everyone, I welcome you all on the behalf of Vijayanagara Media Foundation for the first lecture in the Rabindra Satyagraha Memorial Lecture Series. The first lecture is to be delivered by Professor Aseem Srivastava. Professor Aseem is a writer, teacher, and an ecological thinker. Born in 1962 in Arra, Bihar, Professor Aseem grew up in Kolkata, Patna, and Delhi. He holds a PhD in economics from University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and has taught philosophy at Nordic College in Norway. Professor has co-authored the book Churning of Earth, The Making of Global India. Currently, he is working on a 3-volume book on Rabindranath Tagore's ecological and spiritual vision. He writes regularly for various publications like Economic and Political Weekly, Caravan, The Open Magazine, etc. He also teaches 2 courses on global and Indian ecosophy every year at Ashoka University. Apart from these, he also mentors and guides many students. Fortunately, I am one among them. Professor Aseem personally has a great influence in reshaping my worldview. His both courses have had a huge impact in my thought process, which no other courses or ideology have had in my life so far. He is one of the rare professors who walk the talk. He tries to live ecosophically by voluntarily adopting a simple lifestyle. He takes time and effort to be in touch with the students through various means. He supports all the students' initiatives and also actively participates in those initiatives. More important than all, he is a humble and a honest human being. I invite Professor Aseem to deliver his talk on the topic Rabindranath Tagore and his relevance today. Over to you, Professor.
Namaskaram. Thank you, Mukesh. I hope everything that you said was true, and I hope I can someday live up to some fraction of it. Uh, as many of you as can keep your videos on, please keep them on because it is just easier to speak to moving, changing expressions than to names and abstractions. Um, I think the right place to begin might be a story, and a story which some of you at least have heard from me, so please bear the repetition. Um, it's a story that Rabindranath wrote as a play in about 1922, about 100 years ago. And the story goes like this. So there is a baby who is found abandoned by a mountain stream near a waterfall. And that baby is adopted by the royal family, by the king's family, as the crown prince, because the king does not have an heir, a male heir at least. His name is Obijit. So Obijit in Bangla means the undefeated. And the child sort of grows up alongside this stream and grows very fond of the streams, in love with the stream, visits every day, collects butterflies and plays with pebbles and so on. And then at some point in his growth, when he's a teenager, he's a young man, he realizes that his father has some strange designs on the stream. And he realizes that a dam is being planned across the stream. So he gets very upset because the dam would mean impounding the water, right? You sort of trap the water of the stream. You don't let it flow freely. And not only that, he discovers at some point that there is a village in the valley below in the area called Shivtarai. And this village is going to be deprived of water for its crops. And the villagers are very upset and angry about it. And there is a man called Dhananjay who is leading a revolt against the king for building this dam, right? So he joins Dhananjay, and I'm cutting a long story short, but one night the two of them go and they take a big piece of metal and they damage the bottom of the dam, and the water gushes forth and carries Avijit with it. So he has to go through what is called in our language a Visarjan, which is probably the same in Telugu and in many other languages. So there's a sacrifice, which Tagore recognizes as the highest element of human freedom. Uh, the play is called Muktadhara. Mukt, you understand, is to do with freedom. Dhara is stream. So liberated stream would be a poor English translation of what Rabindranath tries to say in this play. The interesting thing is that the play is written around 1922 when India did not have too many big dams. In fact, it didn't have any big dam as far as I know. There were some anicuts and some causeways built by the British before that, but the first big dam in India, of the kind that there are now about 5,000 in the country, the first big dam comes up in this place called Mulshi, which is in Maharashtra, and the dam still exists. I've been there several times. It supplies water. The Mula River is the one on which the dam is. It supplies water and power to both Pune and Bombay, right? Uh, there, there was a protest against the construction of the dam. The dam was built by the Tatars. This is one of the first projects the Tatars got from the British in 1920s. So the dam was built by the Tatars and was protested heavily by a very significant Gandhian leader called Senapati Bapat. Those of you who know Pune and Bombay will know that there are streets named after Senapati Bapat in Bombay and Pune. Uh, and Bapat actually went to prison in what is called the Mulshi Satyagraha, much like one of the Satyagraha that Shrikar carries out in his village of Edru in Kurnool. Rabindranath's play is right before the time that this dam is built, which is what is quite remarkable. I have not been able to ascertain if Tagore knew about this protest and knew about the dam coming up and so on. I've asked a number of Bengali scholars and nobody seems to know. It's possible that he knew about it, but it's also quite possible that he did not know about it because he had a knack of sort of reading the future, as it were. And in some ways, this play, Muktadhara, pretty much prophesies the pattern of development in India after the 1920s, all the way till the present. There is more continuity than change between what was happening in Indian society, economy, and polity before 1947 and after 1947. 1947 means very little in Indian history compared to what 1857 was. 1857 was when India really lost power completely to the British, and we have not regained that power ever since. Never mind that officially we are regarded as sovereign country. If there was time, I would try to argue with you that India is far more colonized in every sense today than it ever was then. So this is Muktadhara, and this I would contrast with what the world in India, at least in North India, calls Mukhyadhara, mainstream, right? For Rabindranath, there is a profound difference between Muktadhara and Mukhyadhara, okay? And he wrote his entire life against what he recognized as the Mukhyadhara of his time. He would have been far more acid, far more angry with independent India than he was with the British Raj, given where things have gone since 1947 and particularly since 1991 and especially after 2014. So this is a sort of brief sort of background, as it were, in a capsule form as to how this man used to think. And what I want to emphasize here is that Rabindranath actually always thought in metaphor. He always thought in simile. His imagination was always front and center. Nothing is as important as the imagination as far as intelligence is concerned when it comes to Rabindranath. Imagination, I think you would recognize, is a dying element of our intelligence today, thanks to wonderfully powerful technologies which have de-skilled us in every dimension possible. And as artificial intelligence grows upon us, natural intelligence is going to keep receding till we find the courage one day to overthrow these machines. I don't see any other way of actually retrieving what is left of human faculties. And Rabindranath is somebody who protests against the dominion of the machine. These are his words, dominion of the machine. In fact, one of the key characters in Muktadhara is somebody called Yantraraj. So Yantraraj Yantra refers to machine, and Raj you understand, right? So the rule of the machine is what the chief engineer of the dam is named, right? And his boss, the one he reports to, I think he's called Vibhuti. So Vibhuti, you understand, what is Vibhuti? I don't know in English, but glory or pride or something like this. So Rabindranath actually is constantly writing against pride, which is the primary psychological teaching of modernity as we know it. If there's one thing which modernity teaches even to a rat or an ant, it is pride. Okay, so we are great. Somehow we are great. We must be great simply because we say so, right? So Rabindranath was constantly attacking this particular teaching of modern life. Now, I don't have to rehearse with you the achievements of Rabindranath, and unfortunately, modernity is also about achievement, and people's achievements are measured. You will type my name in Google and see how many hits this idiot gets, and that is supposed to be some index of how good a monkey he is in the zoo, right? And that's how it is for all the monkeys around. Okay, this is some incredible way of thinking that 100 books are better than 10 books and 10 books are better than one book. Most books should not have been written, frankly. They're so bad. Okay, I'm constantly telling students not to write books unnecessarily because they create too much confusion in this age of super misinformation. If there were fewer books, good books, I think we'd be much better educated and much humbler in how we relate to knowledge and know the difference between knowledge and that which is greater than knowledge, which one might call wisdom or something like that. So Tagore's achievements, I don't have to rehearse with you, but in 80 short years, he managed to find time to write, God knows, 2,000 or more songs, of which I know maybe 20 quite well and 200 very badly. He wrote about, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 poems, something like that, at least a dozen novels, at least 100 to 200 short stories, maybe more, uh, and hundreds of essays and thousands of letters. And don't ask me when he did all this. And as you know, some of you, the joke in Bengal is that one lifetime is too short to read everything that Rabindranath wrote in his life. His collected works, the Rabindra Rachnavali, goes into some 25, 30 volumes, and it's not complete, I'm told. And there are large areas of Rabindranath's writing in Bangla which have not been translated. In fact, I myself have translated something which I thought would have existed in English or should have existed in English but didn't, and so on. What is this man's primary concern, and why is he important, especially today? If I was to summarize in one word, Rabindranath's main sort of interest is to set humanity free. Like the French thinker Rousseau, Rabindranath felt that man was born free and everywhere he was in chains, and sometimes in golden chains or silver or diamond chains, or today in digital chains, right? So how does one set man free? And this is basically Rabindranath's main life project. He dedicates the entire life to that, beginning with his own life, because if you're not free yourself, how the hell are you going to free others, right? And so he liberates himself from his schooling, from his education at the age of 13. This, I will keep emphasizing till I'm alive, is the single most courageous act of Rabindranath's life. At the age of 13, he decides to dump the white man's education. He thinks it's worthless. He thinks it's something which makes people into timid conformist sheep, and he finds the courage to reject the whole thing. And there are beautiful, long, sarcastic passages in his Atmakotha and various other places where he speaks about how dulling the influence of his school education has been, and how nobody should have to be locked inside a classroom to get educated. I'll come back to this theme since I want to talk a little bit about education as one of Rabindranath's great contributions to modern India and the modern world later on. So this concern with freedom is what Rabindranath embodies in all forms of creative expression that he experiments with, from music and poetry to short stories, novels, plays, etc., and his education, of course. And then what I want to do with you is talk about 5 different things which are aspects of character, elements of Rabindranath's character, uh, which are reflected in his works, both his actual physical work in the world as well as his literary output. Uh, so let me just list them for you first, and then I'll speak a few minutes about each of them. There is authenticity, or what one would like to call truthfulness or integrity. They always say that genius is 10% of, or 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. And that's correct. But what is also true is that most of genius is actually character more than talent. Talent almost everybody has. There's hardly anybody in the world born without talent. But character is something much rarer, and very few people actually manage to develop the character to nourish and nurture their particular talent, without which there is no genius. And genius, in some sense, is not an individual. Genius is simply the most authentic part of an individual. And when that is manifest in the individual's life, that person is called a genius. There is a cult about it. You start hero worshipping people, just like many other human idiocies. This is one of them. But Rabindranath himself is actually quite unperturbed and impervious to all sort of notions of genius and so on. So authenticity, I'll come back to this in a little bit. The other thing which I'll speak about is his constant obsession with creativity and originality, which emerges from a sense of wonder at the universe and at life itself. The very fact that we exist, that we are, is itself an element of wonder. And that leads him into all sorts of interesting areas, and he's constantly playful and lighthearted in how he explores, his life. The third thing is tenacity and his capacity to constantly face crisis with a great deal of faith and confidence and emerge from crisis. Bereavement after bereavement, people he loses, and then he returns somehow to his self. I'll come back to this also. Then there is a certain, shall I say, incomparability or naturalness. This is something strange, it's about uniqueness, I think. It's about the fact that he's completely comfortable being who he is. And he wants others to be comfortable being who they are. Nobody should imitate anybody and that sort of thing. Then there is the aspect of fearlessness and equanimity, and I think the way he achieves it is through love. And it's not about bravado; it's about courage. It's about something much deeper. than outer sort of bravery. And finally, faith. That is the sort of abiding quality in Rabindranath's life throughout. So let me begin by talking about authenticity. And I think here what I want to say is that Rabindranath hardly ever wore a pant and a shirt. I think there are very few pictures you'll find of Rabindranath in a suit or a bushirt and a trousers. He's in robes, he's in kurtas, he's in dhotis. In other words, he was always completely rooted where he came from in Bengal, right? You'll find Gandhi's pictures from younger days in a suit and jacket and tie and so on, not Rabindranath, right? So he never had to go through a sartorial revolution of the kind that Gandhi had to go through when he returned to India and started wearing, dhoti and so on. Rabindranath was constantly living like that. Uh, he was deeply loyal to Bengal and deeply loyal to India. But remarkably, he was not parochial about it. And this is something very, very unique. In other words, he was always a patriot and never a nationalist. And I'll come back to this theme because he was viciously critical of all nationalism, including, of course, Indian nationalism. He distinguished between Indian nationalism and Western or European forms of nationalism because Indian nationalism was defensive against imperialism from the West, and yet he was very, very skeptical of it. So he was very much a patriot, loyal to the soil, but not a nationalist. I'll come back to this. He was very keen to retrieve the cultural essence, as it were, of this civilization, and in general of the Oriental world. And he felt that the Orient had given too much of itself away to the Occident, to the West, right, because of colonization. And we lost our way. So, for instance, when he goes to Japan, he makes 3 trips to Japan in 1916, 1924, and 1929. And in all those 3 trips, he's very keen to emphasize to the Japanese the importance of keeping modernity as much at bay as possible. And he constantly emphasizes that Japan still has visible somewhere behind the mist of the modern its original character, its original culture, as expressed in its arts and crafts and its customs and its norms, which are so different from the West, so on. So today's Japan would have deeply pained and disappointed Rabindranath. Today's anything would have pained and disappointed him. In 1920, at the age of about 60, Rabindranath finds the strength to start a university. And that's when most people are ready to retire, right? And Rabindranath has a new career in mind. Every year he would start a new career. And so at the age of 60, he decides that he wants to start a university, which goes by Vishwabharati in Shantiniketan in Bengal at the moment. Still exists, the university. And I'm going to read to you a passage which is from the lecture he gave when he was starting the university. So his image of the university was, at least Vishwabharati was, um, of the whole world in one nest, okay? In one small place, the whole world should exist in miniature. So it was a kind of a cultural microcosm of the world that he conceived the university as, that he would invite people from all over the world, and especially from the Oriental world, from China, Japan, Vietnam, etc., to come and teach at Vishabharati. And they did, and sometimes they still do. Here is what he said. It's a somewhat longish quotation, so please bear with me. But it's very interesting and important what he says in this lecture. And some of Rabindranath's best passages are actually from his lectures, which are very rarely studied with the same intensity as his novels. So he says, before Asia is in a position to cooperate with the culture of Europe, she must base her own structure on a synthesis of all the different cultures which she has. When taking her stand on such a culture, she turns towards the West, she will take with a confident sense of mental freedom her own view of truth from her own vantage ground and open a new vista of thought to the world. Otherwise, she will allow her priceless inheritance to crumble into dust and trying to replace it clumsily with feeble imitations of the West, make herself superfluous, cheap, and ludicrous. If she thus loses her individuality and her specific power to exist, will it in the least help the rest of the world? Will not her terrible bankruptcy involve also the Western mind? If the whole world grows at last into an exaggerated West, then such an illimitable parody of the modern age will die, crushed beneath its own absurdity. There are some who are exclusively modern, who believe that the past is a bankrupt time, leaving no assets for us but only a legacy of debts. They refuse to believe that the army which is marching forward uh, can be fed from the rear. It is well to remind such persons that the great ages of Renaissance in history were those when man suddenly discovered the seeds of thought in the granary of the past. The unfortunate people who have lost the harvest of their past have lost their present age. They have missed their seed for cultivation and go begging for their bare livelihood. We must not imagine that we are one of these disinherited peoples of the world. The time has come for us to break open the treasure trove of our ancestors and use it for our commerce of life. Let us, with its help, make our future our own and not continue our existence as the eternal rag pickers in other people's dustbins. Repeat, not continue our existence as the eternal rag pickers in other people's dustbins. Look at our great Hindu saviors today. Every second thing they do is a mission. Which Hindu text, tell me, speaks about a mission? Show me one line in the Vedas or the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita which speaks about a mission. Where is the idea of a mission from? And how did Hindu rulers get this into their nut? Right? We don't ask these simple questions. We don't even wonder at the fact that if these are the Hindus, God save us. Yeah. So you need people like Rabindranath and Kabir to stand up and say to these jokers who they are. Let's find that courage because it's not going to work otherwise. So this passage that I just read to you is in some ways very, very emblematic of the search that Tagore was on all his life. He didn't have to search very hard. He found it all around him. In other words, all the cultural treasures which he wanted available to him. He grew up speaking Bangla. Bangla was always his first language. English, he insisted, even till the time that he got the Nobel Prize in his 50s, that English is not his language. So please forgive me if my English is not very good. His English was excellent, by the way, but he was constantly of the view that his Bangla was his main language, and it was. He wrote only one song in English, I think, and it's a good song. But his Bangla songs are far greater. So this sort of, uh, I wouldn't say pride, I will say this sort of comfort in your own language, in your own idiom, in your own customs, in your own norms. And it's not like these are not problematic. Nowadays, whenever you bring up tradition, immediately you'll be told everything that's wrong with it. Everybody has a whole long list. There's something wrong with every tradition in the world. There's something wrong with every society, every culture in the world. But very few other cultures simply rush towards another culture to find the solution to their own, right? Most cultures work out the solution to their problems in terms of their own culture, in terms of their own matrix. right? And both Gandhi and Rabindranath have been criticized for being critical of modernity because they are seen to be, backward looking in that sense, especially Gandhi. But in both cases, these are people who are critical traditionalists, who are completely comfortable with tradition and also completely comfortable criticizing tradition and sometimes on its own terms. And that's the way to handle it by actually, holding people to their own best norms, to their own best selves, to their own best, highest ideals. And Rabindranath never felt that you needed to go outside Satyam Shivam Advaitam or Satyam Shivam Sundaram to criticize whatever was wrong with the India of his day or the India of today, he would say. Right? You don't need liberty, fraternity, equality to criticize what is wrong with India. So this kind of a blind embrace of modern values is not something which he looked up to at all, and he was quite critical of. So this is the key aspect of his authenticity, that he was never willing to compromise on some of these basic things. Then the whole question of creativity and originality emerges from his experience of mystery. He experiences life as a mystery. He experiences his own life as a mystery. He experiences every day that sense of mystery. He goes through a number of mystical experiences where it's there on the record in lectures he gives later on in life, where he speaks about uh, uh, how some completely mysterious force from nowhere took possession of him and left him in a mood of complete ecstasy, and he found himself almost dancing with joy. So mystery is very important as an element of his experience. He finds himself daydreaming on a houseboat on the Padma River when he's looking after his family estates in East Bengal, in a place called Shelaidaho, near Kushtia in modern day Bangladesh. So there's any number of letters he writes there, poems he writes there, music he composes there, which sort of echo that experience of the mystery of the monsoon, for instance, dark clouds billowing all over, and the sort of beauty of thunder and lightning and so on. Something which has actually gone out of our experience now. I mean, how many years has it been since Delhi had a monsoon? So we don't even seem to be bothered that the monsoon has vanished from Delhi because we're making such rapid progress towards becoming a developed country. Uh, then there is this childlike playfulness and humor about Rabindranath. He's constantly alert to the lighter side of things. And his humor can sometimes be quite pungent. Like, for instance, when he meets Bertrand Russell being the great English philosopher and mathematician. And he has a long conversation with Russell, and then he comes back and he writes a letter to Andrews. Andrews is Rabindranath's close friend. And he says, such men would dearly like to believe in God, but they first need a receipt. So that's his impression of people who would like to have faith but actually don't. It's a big difference between having faith and keeping it and wanting it, right? So these are all aspects of his, what I would call his authenticity. The second aspect of his character, which is crucial to understand, is his tenacity, his persistence, the capacity to live each day as though it's the first and the last. You know, one of my close friends in America, now he has passed on. He used to say, "I live every day as though it's the very first day of my life, and it's also the very last day of my life." And that's sort of immediacy and urgency about living, especially in a time of the pandemic, when we realize how fragile everything is, when we are losing people in our families and among friends every single day. It makes everything so much more precious. It does not mean that you cling to life. Quite the opposite. One should be willing to die anytime, and that's the point. But value every drop of it that you do have, you know. And it's not very wise to be done with life before life is done with you, right? That's the way, at least, I see it. And Rabindranath, you see this quality in him throughout. He never gives up. He knows how to surrender, very different from giving up, right? He knows how to surrender, and his surrender is not to any power of this world. He would never surrender before any power of this world, right? But his surrender is to the divine, to the deity as he experiences his Jivon Devata, as he calls him, within his own soul. Okay, complete surrender to that. Uh, he loses within the space of 6 years. First, he loses his wife when he's about 40. Then he loses his father. He's lost his mother as a child. Then he loses his daughter, Renuka. And finally, he loses his son, Shomendro. Shomendro is about 8 when he dies. And Rabindranath has the strength to write a poem the same day that he loses his son. And it's addressed to God. And it's saying, I cannot understand why you have done this. I cannot understand the meaning of this event. Perhaps someday I will. Till then, I will have to accept your verdict. Something like that. So, over these 6 years in his early 40s, he loses pretty much his entire close family. And one of his sons goes to America to study. One of his other daughters goes through a separation soon after. And then for the next few years, he's at work on Gitanjali. And Gitanjali, as the name suggests, is offerings in song. And that's the sort of creative resolution of his crisis when he comes face to face with his weakest, most vulnerable sides, having been bereaved multiple times. He's all by himself. He goes to the Himalayas. He writes these poems in devotion and in expression of his humility and vulnerability before the greater mysterious forces of life, right? So he's constantly working on himself invisibly at the level of the spirit, strengthening himself. With every loss, he grows stronger, not physically, but spiritually, right? That tenacity is the secret of his prodigality. And that's why I said, it's true of him, like of some other, uh, you know, people described as genius, that most of it is perspiration. Uh, Talent everybody has, character not many manage to find. The third thing about his character, which I will emphasize, is his simplicity and naturalness. You know, he says somewhere, to be happy is very simple, but to be simple is not easy. You know, to be simple is very difficult. Most of us prefer being complicated. It's like what some of you write on your Facebook status. It's complicated. So it's easy to be complicated. It's not easy to be simple. You know, Rabindranath had the gift of simplicity, and he nurtured it. And you will not find a single piece of writing anywhere which is complicated or unnecessarily full of jargon or prolix or something like that. It's always very easy to be fooled that you understood him when you've not understood him. Because the words are very simple, the ideas are very complex, and he's able to communicate complex ideas in simple words. That's an aspect of character which he has, lucidity, which, with no interest in obfuscation, no interest in concealment, he's able to share his heart and soul as they are. Um Linked to tenacity is what I would call passion, but passion not the way Mahendra Singh Dhoni or Sachin Tendulkar would understand passion, but passion as capacity for suffering. The ancient meaning of the original meaning of the word passion is capacity for suffering. the capacity to be passive in the most active sense of the word. So the capacity for suffering is what gives him the patience to understand what suffering means and to be able to render it in creative form. Every time he writes a song, it is with the purpose of overcoming some moment of suffering in his life. You know? So music as a way to sublimate pain is something which he knows, which he understands. Uh, it gives him an equanimity. It keeps renewing, replenishing the love in his heart. The experience of love that he has is about as religious as love gets. Love is a religious emotion to Rabindranath, and all that he's able to summon in order to face the challenges, the existential and psychological challenges of his life. Uh, and from this comes his sense of courage, and from a young age, like I said, he left school at the age of 13, but then later in life, in his 50s, after he gets the Nobel Prize when he's about 50, 51, uh, he's then knighted. He is given knighthood by the British Empire in 1915. And 4 years later, Jallianwala Bagh massacre takes place in Amritsar, and hundreds of innocents are butchered in cold blood by the empire's security forces. And Rabindranath gives up his knighthood. Now, you didn't do that in those days. Award wapasi was not something people would do, and not to the British Empire, not to the white man, but Rabindranath couldn't care two hoots about it. He returned the knighthood, right? So he knows how to speak truth to the West, and he constantly tells them that they are not free. Not many Indians you will be able to quote who have the guts to stand before the white man and say, "You are not free. You know, you may be powerful, but free you are not." And he goes and says it in front of Herbert Hoover in the 1930s in America. And even before that, he has spoken about it in America. If you go to Jorashanko, his home in Kolkata, in Thakurbadi, you will find there is a very beautiful lecture. You won't find it published because that lecture has not been published, but it's there on the walls of the museum in his old house, where he's speaking to an American audience which has the American president in it, and he's telling them, "You are not free," you know. So you won't find that kind of courage in today's Indian intellectuals living in the West. Name one Indian intellectual right now who has been saying this openly to the West. Just when the West is least free it has ever been in hundreds of years. Finally, in Shobhita Shankar, which is his last testament, 1941, towards the end of his life, translated in English as Crisis in Civilization, which is a talk he gives on the radio. Uh, he is completely unafraid to again tell the West what it is, and repeatedly he says that India has been left as a vast heap of futility thanks to the British Raj. And, how will we get out of this filth? We don't know. That's the sort of, those are the words he uses. Um, Eric Erikson, who is a very well-known psychologist, um, long past now, American psychologist, he did quite a good study of Tagore in which he said the following. He said Tagore reasserted the traditional inclusion in the Indian identity of the feminine and the maternal, the sensual and the experiential, the receptive and the transcendental in human life, right? So, in other words, Tagore recognized Indian culture very differently from today's intellectuals, which is to say, he says there's femininity, there's the maternal aspect, sensual, experiential, receptive, transcendental, right? And all this in contrast to modern masculinized Western culture, right? So this is Erik Erikson talking about Tagore. And finally, the quality which I think distinguishes Rabindranath and certainly puts him a mile apart from any secular intellectual is the whole question of faith, right? There's hardly a page anywhere in Rabindranath where you will not see evidence of faith, explicitly or implicitly. He's constantly talking about it. And he says somewhere, faith is the bird that feels the light and sings when the dawn is still dark. You know, that line is quoted very often. You'll find it quoted very, you'll find it quoted in today's newspapers when you have Rabindranath being officially celebrated by, officials. Then they always, like to quote this line. Of course, nobody practices it because nobody has faith anymore in nihilist advanced India. So this is in some ways the sort of touchstone or cornerstone of his personality, and something which he is constantly working at to renew, to strengthen. And there are any number of songs he writes about it, any number of poems he writes about it, uh, conversations with God, conversations with his Jivan Devata, etc. That they're all over his poetry and his writing. He believes in a certain unity of creation. If we do not experience it, it's because we have turned against ourselves. Most of us, we just assume that we stand for ourselves, but Rabindranath would disagree, say, no, we don't stand for ourselves. It's our inadequate or our wrong love of ourselves, which, which we have, which we actually confuse with the true love which we should have of ourselves. So, and that true love of ourselves can only come if you recognize in your own heart and soul something greater than yourself, something other than yourself. When you recognize the other as another within yourself, you know, so the other is not just somebody out there, the other is also somebody in here, right? And unless you see the other as another, you're not going to experience what he's talking about as faith, right? Now, I want to close in the last 5 minutes by talking about his relevance today. And I wanted to say 5 things, but I think I'll say only 3 things and leave 2 for discussion time. I've already mentioned nationalism versus patriotism, and I think that Rabindranath would have completely agreed with Einstein when Einstein had said love for one's country is a very good thing, but why should it stop at the borders? So that is Rabindranath's patriotism. In other words, there's no exclusive love for one's own country. I'm going to quote to you a line from Nationalism. Nationalism are these lectures which Rabindranath gives in 3 countries, in Japan, United States, and India. Very powerful lectures. So in one of them he says, "It is my conviction that my countrymen will truly gain their India by fighting against the education which teaches them that a country is greater than the ideals of humanity." Right? It is my conviction that my countrymen will truly gain their India by fighting against the education which teaches them that a country is greater than the ideals of humanity, and never been more valid than today. There's not a single patriot working in the Indian government right now. Otherwise, you won't have this pandemic raging the way it is. They're all pseudo-nationalists masquerading as patriots. They're all living in Selfistan, pretending to be Indians, and so on. So this was his view of nationalism, and one could, talk the whole day just about his understanding of nationalism. There's hardly any writer I've read who is more perceptive and more prophetic about the dangers of nationalism than Rabindranath. The second aspect which I'd like to emphasize when it comes to his relevance today is the importance of the feminine. And I'm going to read to you a passage from an essay called Personality, which he writes around 1915, in which there's a chapter called Woman, which some of you read in ecosophy courses at Ashoka. So here's what he says there. At the present stage of history, civilization is almost exclusively masculine. A civilization of power in which woman has been thrust aside in the shade. Therefore, the civilization has lost its balance and it is moving by hopping from war to war. Its motive forces are the forces of destruction, and its ceremonials are carried through by an appalling number of human sacrifices. This one-sided civilization is crashing along a series of catastrophes at a tremendous speed because of this one-sidedness. And at last, the time has arrived when woman must step in and impart her life rhythm to this reckless movement of power. That's one passage there, and there's one more thing I wanted to read to you. At the present stage of civilization, when the mutilation of individuals is not only practiced but glorified, women are feeling ashamed of their own womanliness. For God, with his message of love, has sent them as guardians of individuals. And in this, their divine vocation, individuals are more to them than army and navy and parliament, shops and factories. Here, they have their service in God's own temple of reality, where love is of more value than power. But because men in their pride of power have taken to deriding things that are living and relationships that are human, a large number of women are screaming themselves hoarse to prove that they are not women, that they are true where they represent power and organization. That in the present age, they feel that their pride is hurt when they're taken as mere mothers of the race, as the ministers to the vital needs of its existence and to its deeper spiritual necessity of sympathy and love. So next time you hear the World Bank talking about women's empowerment, think about these passages. And finally, or maybe penultimately, I want to say something about Rabindranath's attitude to nature, and something which is rather crucial right now as we wade through this pandemic. Uh, there's a very large number of passages where he speaks about nature on very, very intimate terms, and where he celebrates the fact that we are born in this world of nature, of so much beauty, of so much glory of creation. And uh, the way he thinks about freedom is that humanity can actually never find freedom till it lives in intimacy with nature. That, you know, sitting under a tree and learning something is a world apart from sitting in a four-walled, whitewashed classroom, as you would say, and learning something there. Yeah, going for a walk in the woods and learning something in that way is very different from learning it in a seminar room or a library. The great religious books, he would argue, were meant to be read in the open under the sky, not in a seminary or a university. Right. So in that sense, his attitude to nature is very different from the modern attitude that science and technology take, where underlying everything is the myth of the conquest of nature, of taming nature, of converting the wild into something domesticated, domesticating nature, right? Why is this important right now in the pandemic? Because virtually the entire world, barring a few noble exceptions, has been thinking of basically defeating this virus, right? Not only defeating this virus, but actually eradicating the virus, exterminating it, putting an end to its existence. And this is why this whole strategy is bound to fail. You will lose this war, We will lose this war precisely because of this. What Rabindranath would say is that the wilderness is not something far away and is not something you can ever tame, and nor should you want to or try to. You should, on the contrary, try to learn from it and wherever necessary, negotiate with it. And let there be boundaries, but don't let these boundaries become impermeable. And likewise with the virus. You know? So instead of fighting the virus, you have to negotiate better with it. Concretely, what would this mean in today's epidemiology? It would mean that those epidemiologists who are saying that you need to achieve herd immunity, there is no other way to actually end the sickness. You have to achieve herd immunity. The question is how best to do it. Okay? By all means, use a vaccine. But if you want to vaccinate everybody, then the advantage that the elderly, the sick, and the children have is lost because the virus doesn't have room to go anywhere, find hosts, replicate, and multiply. And even those people who are able to actually absorb the virus will not be able to. And so the virus will have a greater tendency to mutate under pressure, and especially when you combine mass vaccination with lockdowns, which is what India is doing at the moment. Okay. Then the virus has an even more vicious tendency to mutate. And new variants will always be ahead. And the vaccination, whichever vaccine you develop, will be based on the RNA of lapsed viruses, and so ever so slightly outmoded, if not heavily outmoded. And so nature is always ahead. You know? So how are you going to win this? You know? So in other words, the whole thing is wrongly conceived. And all because drug and pharma will do very well as a result of this pandemic. They will grow their profits and they will commercially do very well. So this is a very simple example of how a different attitude to nature would actually help us at this point of time uh, compared to what you have as orthodoxy today, where uh, everybody must be and should be vaccinated. I've shared with some of you the example of Taiwan, which probably has one of the best records of dealing with this pandemic. In a country of 24 million people, only 12 people have died in 12 months. And that says something about the maturity with which they've handled it compared to cultures of Europe, for instance. And Belgium and Netherlands have roughly the same population as Taiwan. Together, Belgium and Netherlands are about the same 25, 26 million. And they've lost 41,000 people. So clearly they've done something wrong and Taiwan has done something right. Find out what it is, you know. So this is an example of how somebody like Rabindranath used to view nature and how I think he might address a contemporary issue like the pandemic. I've spoken a lot about education, but I'll close with saying something about Swaraj because Rabindranath, like Gandhi, actually did believe in Swaraj and did believe in Swaraj in a way in which he never believed in democracy. And they carried out experiments in Swaraj, in Shantiniketan and Sriniketan, which is the village next to Shantiniketan, where there were experiments in sort of cooperative farming and crafts, which, in some moribund form survive to this day. So Rabindranath was of the view that till you achieve cooperation at the village level, at the grassroots level, you are never going to be able to be an independent country. If you're looking for genuine independence, then it has to build from the ground up to the top. That politics will sort itself out. And this was one of the bases of his differences with Gandhi. The politics will sort itself out, provided you get the foundations right. And the foundations lie ultimately in rural cooperation, to which also he gave the name Swaraj. Okay, I think I'll stop there. I've exceeded my time, or maybe not. But we can have some discussion now for about 20, 25 minutes. Um, who wants to start?
It was a while we were reading about Rabindranath Tagore in Kamala Devi's book, Inner Recesses, Outer Spaces. We got to know that, like, she wrote that all the institutions that were founded by Rabindranath Tagore, Vishwabharati, Sriniketan, Shantiniketan, they were not in good shape. She was writing this back in 1980s, and she was commenting. I mean, the values that he wanted to continue, they were not being continued, and so on and so forth. So, what do you think? Uh, what happened to his institutions? Are they functioning the way we intended them to function?
Not at all. And In fact, I thought you would say when she was writing in the 1940s already, the institutions were not functioning well because they've actually not been functioning well since Rabindranath died. And in fact, even while he's alive, I've gone through correspondence where there are people who are complaining to him and saying to him that, look, so and so is fighting with so and this is going on and that is happening. And so all the usual sort of conflicts and ego problems that people have were happening even while Tagore was alive in the 1920s and 30s. There's no way around it. You will find it everywhere. You will find it everywhere simply because that's how messy we are as human beings. So they were not functioning as he had intended, even while he was alive, let alone after his death in 1941. Um, there is no simple way around this except to work with people and fail and fail and fail, and maybe sometimes you also make a breakthrough. Occasionally you do get cooperation. I find it quite a miracle that, Birbhum, which is where Shantiniketan is basically red laterite soil, was almost desertified in 1900, was revived uh, by replantation, including by Rabindranath himself. You can go and sit under banyans in Shantiniketan, which are planted by Rabindranath. Um, so the place was regenerated ecologically, and they managed to create a school and ultimately a university without any government assistance, without any bureaucracy, without any great support from outside, with very limited funds from outside. They managed to do it. And the fact that it has even survived these 100 years itself says something. You know, so one great man doesn't make an institution. You know, there were many great people in Shantiniketan, by the way. It's not just Rabindranath. There's, there's Ram Kinkar Ved, there's Kalimon Ghosh, there's lots of people, very, very dedicated, who gave their entire lives to these institutions to enable them to take root. But this is constantly the human dilemma. We look for blueprints, formulas, easy answers. There are none. I don't know any. There are no formulas to reach paradise. So these are things which have to be lived, which have to be faced, and you have to get to a point where people begin to trust each other and possibly love each other, and then maybe they're able to do something unique. And that may not live for all time, but that still, for whatever time it lives, has significance. You know? Just like the fragrance of a flower doesn't live for all times, but has significance while it is there. Mm. I think that's the best we can do as human beings. If we can do that, it's a lot. Then I would say we've lived good lives if we can get a sense of the flavor of this kind of um, life. I wouldn't call it success. Success is a dirty word, very soiled. So I'll avoid that.
So, Professor, I have a question. So, when it comes to any leader or reformers like Ambedkar, Periyar, or Phule, or even Rajaram Mohan Rai, we can see the impact of their work even today. So, is there any impact of Tagore in present day Bengal, either in arts or literature or in any other form?
Well, in literary terms, of course, there is a profound impact. I mean, I doubt if Bengali literature, the little that I am aware of it, um, would be what it is without Tagore. I mean, Tagore is significantly responsible for the revival of uh, um, Bengali literature and its confidence in it. Tagore is not the only figure, of course. There is Bankim, there is Vidyasagar, there is, Sharat Chandra, there is Vibhuti Bhushan, there's many people. Tagore is one of them. And sometimes not the greatest of short story writers. I would say Sharat Chandra is a greater short story writer than Tagore. It's easy to be taken in by Tagore's charisma and ignore the great literary contributions of other Bengali writers. I think that Bengali literature certainly, and even more than Bengali literature, perhaps Bengali music um, carries all the legacy of what Tagore did, because he was such a great innovator. He was not a classicist in music. He would play around with ragas and forms, and he would experiment hugely. But Rabindra Sangeet has a soul and a life of its own. I mean, I've discussed it with musicians much more knowledgeable than amateurs like me, and they can recognize that there is a unique contribution here. There is an aesthetic novelty. There is something terribly new that Tagore does. And he blends, and he's a great assimilator. He blends in so many cultures. The culture of Bengal, the culture of rest of North India and South India, the culture of Europe, Irish ballads. He's able to draw from so many sources and make something new. So and it's the same in poetry, in Bengali poetry. So certainly in the arts, the imprint of Tagore is quite deep. But the problem is this: after 1857, and particularly after 1885, India gets increasingly politicized as a civilization. Now, this is something which observers of that time notice, Rabindranath included. But you also have people like Vivekanand and Aurobindo Ghosh and others who notice how India is getting politicized. All of them say at that time that India has been a spiritual civilization. And they say that we are now mutating into a political civilization, and this is dangerous. You have the results in front of you. Wherever you look around in India today, every little leaf is politicized now. Now, this is a European cancer which India absorbed, and now most people can't think outside the boundaries of politics and ideology. And then you have the wonderful feminist slogan, the personal is the political and the political is the personal. The most dangerous of all slogans, taken into your heart. Why don't we say the personal is the spiritual and the spiritual is the personal? Because we don't have any notion of what the spirit means anymore. As if we have a notion of what politics means anymore. And the reason why we don't is because we don't have a sense of what the spirit means anymore. Because Europe itself has gone soulless, so we also decided it's progress to become soulless. Let's follow them. So why am I saying this? Because what this means is that then Rabindranath gets easily typecast as an upper caste landlord, from an aristocratic Tagore background, and therefore, there are all sorts of Marxist imperatives which follow from that class premise. False is all I would say. You know nothing about even Marxism if that's how you think. The metric or the parameter on which people are understood and judged by modern Indians is politics. And Rabindranath despises politics, and he speaks openly about the lies of politics and commerce. Yeah. So therefore, easy to label and push aside. This is a very wonderful American habit which all educated Indians have learned rather well now. You just label somebody, put them in a drawer, you don't have to open the drawer again. You don't have to think. Contend, no? Why don't you listen to the arguments? Why don't you listen to the facts? Why don't you argue with those observations? Willing to be proved wrong, but no. He's anti-feminist, don't talk about it. It's a way of not thinking, basically. It's an excuse for not thinking. Lazy minds will do that. Ashoka is good at teaching you those things. So, so this is the problem. I mean, Ashoka is an all-American university, and most American universities are very good at teaching you labeling. I am quite convinced that both Tagore and Gandhi, and not just Tagore and Gandhi, but several other figures of that time will go through a big revival in the coming decades. They're already going through revival outside India. It's a question of when Indians wake up to their legacies. Because we have this strange idea that you can build a future out of the future, and you can't build no future without the past.
Professor, I have a question. Can I go ahead?
Please.
So, Professor, you asked us to read that essay by Partho Chatterjee, and you asked us to kind of think through it. And in that, there is one part which talks about how Tagore believed most solutions to any problem that's on a national scale should rise up from the grassroots, should arise from the bottom. But Partho Chatterjee kind of argues as to how that's really not possible, and he cites the example of the mosquito eradication, the malaria eradication program. And in the essay by Tagore that you made us read, the robbery of the soil, on what the ideal relationship between the city and a village should be, he too believes that cities in a way should shine their light upon the villages and to their benefit. So is there like a congruence of thought between what Tagore sees as a city, a central point, or a central, I don't know if you can call it a power structure, but like you know I'm not able to articulate it very well, but so he too believes there are some solutions which cannot arise from the bottom and has to be kind of homogenized for rural India.
No, I don't think Partho understands Tagore very well. I mean, if I may say so. I know it's rude of non-Bengalis to say this to Bengalis about Tagore, but it's true, I think. Because I think that the problem arises from two things. Most modernists, and Partho Chatterjee included, tend to think of larger things as being made up of smaller things. So sort of an analytical mode of thinking, and the second is that they take the metropolitan world for granted. The metropolitan world is their fixed point. So Partho Chatterjee's life in New York City in Columbia University as a professor is a fixed point. Why should it be a fixed point? It's entirely transient, it's entirely mutable, it's entirely changeable. And why should it take a privileged position in the scheme of things? So that has to be contended with. Tagore was not talking about the city deciding for the village, never. Tagore was talking, however, of a dialogue between city and village. And if you read Robbery of the Soil, it's very, very clear there. It's also between the lines in many other places where, he says in Robbery of the Soil, the villages are the cradle of civilization and so on. But not for Amartya Sen or Amit Chaudhary, and not for the modernists, because for them, villages are a thing of the past. Why? Because that's how the developed world has gone, right? In country after industrialization, you moved from farming to industry, you moved from village to city. And from the city, you will go to moon and Mars. That's the natural cosmology. And it's a very corrupt and indulgent cosmology. And it's the cosmology which is bringing everything down now. You know? This is what I'm writing in my book. I'm attacking all these people because I think it has to be, this mode of thought has to be destroyed, because this is a delusion of the worst kind. The fact that, you think you can get away from the village, or you can get away from the jungle, or from the oceans, or whatever you want to get away from. So escape is not freedom, So if you think differently, and Tagore is proposing in Robbery of the Soil that we think differently, he says, by all means, cities play their part in human cultures. Cities are where different cultures meet. Cities are where different cultures cross-fertilize their thoughts. All good. But then if you lose contact with your roots, which are actually somewhere else, if you have only cities, you will not have a culture. So the whole is more than the sum of the parts. You see, and that's where the difference with Partha's thinking is. The whole is more than the sum of the parts. You can't reach scale in the business or the intellectual sense by adding to parts. That's not the way. And scale is not the objective. In fact, scale is the problem. With modernity, two things are the problem: scale and speed. And unless we slow down, and unless we downscale, we are done for. We'll be made history of by the microbes. The main message of this pandemic is what? Stop that bloody restlessness. Stay in one place for some time, for God's sake. It's not so bad. Rabindranath says, I've traveled the whole world, but I have not looked carefully at the dewdrop on the leaf on the mango tree outside my house. So, what we call in our language, pehrao, pause. That pause is not permitted in a progressive modernity, which is hell-bent on driving itself to extinction. So, the larger will take care of itself if the smaller gets its place, because the smaller will have a certain pull, will have a certain attraction. Once you realize you've been escaping all along and losing your opportunities for paradise at every step, then you will inevitably slow down. You'll focus on what is really near to you. And then the larger will take care of itself. But modernizers and Marxists don't have much patience with any of this. And they're doomed to fail. They're doomed to fail for this reason. That essay of Partha, he doesn't get it. He doesn't get it. He doesn't understand that you can't think about scale in that way that you're thinking about it. Scale is part of the problem, not part of the solution. It does not mean we don't need climate negotiations, for God's sake. Of course we do. But that's a necessary evil. We shouldn't have got to this point. Human society ought not to have been blackmailed to this point of despair, where you need negotiations over things which end in deadlocks between countries. So, that's the way I would see it.
Professor, thank you so much for this very, very enriching session. Your words today have really enlightened us about so much of the life of the great Kaviguru Rabindranath Tagore. To conclude the session, I'd just like to take the opportunity to sing two lines of Rabindra Sangit, Shankajara Vyuhalata, and maybe explain it in short, and read out a few lines of a poem that inspired the posters for this event, and also giving us the message to like that little corner of the earth that we've been living in. So first, the song Shankochitra Vyuhalata. সংকোচের ব্যূহলতা নিজেরে অপমান, সংকটেরই কল্পনাতে হইও না ম্রিয়মান। মুক্ত করো ভয়, আপনা মাঝে শক্তি ধরো, নিজেরে করো জয়। মুক্ত করো ভয়, আপনা মাঝে শক্তি ধরো, নিজেরে করো জয়। সংকোচের ব্যূহলতা নিজেরে অপমান, সংকটেরই কল্পনাতে হইও না ম্রিয়মান। The words basically mean that hesitation is another name of defamation. Restrain yourself from being gloomy in expectations of unforeseen misery. Free yourself from fear. Unleash strength. Win over yourself and save the weak. Shove the evil away. To proceed to the poem, we go with this. It's the Tal Gach poem, a poem about a palm tree. তাল গাছ এক পায়ে দাঁড়িয়ে সব গাছ ছাড়িয়ে উকি মারে আকাশে, মনে সাধ কালো মেঘ ফুড়ে যায়, একেবারে উড়ে যায়, কোথা পাবে পাখা সে? তাই তো সে ঠিক তার মাথাতেই গোল গোল পাতাতে ইচ্ছেটি মেলে তার, মনে মনে ভাবে বুঝি ডানা এই, উড়ে যেতে মানা নেই, বাসা খানি ফেলে তার। সারাদিন ঝরঝর থরথর কাঁপে পাতা পত্তর, উড়ে যেন ভাবে ও, মনে মনে আকাশেতে বেরিয়ে তারাদের এড়িয়ে যেন কোথা যাবে ও। তারপর হাওয়া যেই নেমে যায়, পাতা কাপা থেমে যায়, ফেরে তার মনটি, যেই ভাবে মাঝে হয় মাটি তার, ভালো লাগে আরবার পৃথিবীর কোনটি। It talks about a palm tree which keeps dreaming of looking at a sky, at a world beyond the skies, beyond the stars. When the wind blows, it imagines itself to be flying away with these wings, with these leaves as its wings. But as soon as the wind falls, it starts loving its little mother nature's corner where it has been living forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Imon. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Professor. Thank you all for joining us today. So the series will go on, but because of the uncertain times we are in, I did not publish the entire list. So it will be, I'll send you the details of each talk day by day, because it's very uncertain and I don't know what happens tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Srigar, for organizing it, and thanks to all of you for listening.